Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. And this is another episode of the Best of the West Book Club. And today we are looking at The Case for Patriarchy, Timothy Gordon's book, one of our co hosts on Sea Mask. And he argues that the main way that Christianity has lost its way is by losing the household patriarchy. With me today is Dr. Robillard. How are you?
Not bad. How you doing, Will?
Yeah, very well. I'm excited for this one. I think this
Same
is
here.
the central project for the recovery of the West.
Yeah, certainly has to be. It has to start in the home. It has to start with men.
That's exactly right. So let's find out then what went wrong and how we can recover it. We'll begin with our prayer as usual. And Dr. Robillard, you are leading the prayer today.
The Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, divine creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom. Pour forth your brilliance upon my dense intellect. Dissipate the darkness which covers me, that of sin and of ignorance. Grant me a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and ease in learning, lucidity to comprehend, and abundant grace in expressing myself. Guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to successful completion. This I ask through Jesus Christ, true God and true man, living and reigning with you and the Father, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. So let's open then with this remark, which is standard Christian doctrine, but very controversial today. Married laymen are patriarchs relating to their wives, as Christ relates to his bride, the church. Now, this is Tim's book in a nutshell, isn't it?
It is, yeah. This is pretty much the central thesis.
Now, why is it controversial then? Patriarchy means literally rule by fathers. So, how do you lose track of something so basic that it's contained in the definition of the word itself?
Well, I would say it's if anyone's listened to our earlier podcast, they'll realize that we have been through many generations now of liberalizing egalitarianism sentiment that has withered away the people and the social fabric, such that anything now that looks vertical is suddenly regarded as fascist or authoritarian or unjustly hierarchical. So if anything that has a whiff of verticality to it, it's going to be looked at with deep suspicion and hostility. So I think that sentiment being in the culture makes it seeps into the church, and it gets into the home.
Well, the cross is bad news for them then, if it's the intersection of time and eternity, as Simone Weil put it. We've got that vertical axis right there. And patriarchy ultimately depends on deference to the transcendent. So, yes, men lead, but they also follow. The man follows God, and then the woman follows the man, and the child follows the woman and man together.
Hmm.
Now, that's this model, isn't it? Christ and
It
his
is.
bride, the church, the husband and the wife.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's the lay patriarchy, and then the uh, church patriarchy. The magisterium is the church version of it. So you have two parallel patriarchies that make up the um, secular Christendom.
Now, how come this isn't just tyrannical authority then? Because for a lot of guys, this idea of thinking themselves as fundamentally husbands and fathers rather than just individual bros who just go and do their own thing and their lives are all about autonomy is
Mm.
quite an alien way of understanding themselves. Liberalism has told them the opposite, which is that family isn't fundamental. You're your
Hmm.
own person, you find your own way, and you can be your own hero.
Right. Yeah. So that it removes authority, and it also removes any sense of accountability or duty. So that worldview cleaves both those things away. And yeah, it's just the individual, I don't know, chasing their own conception of what happiness or flourishing is. But then at the end of the day, I mean, is it really even theirs that they've authentically arrived at, or is it just, they've been been bombarded with marketing schemes to tell them that, this new product will, or this new identity will be the thing that makes them whole. So even the individual, the self-made man coming up with his own authorship, even that I think these days is suspect. It's, usually someone's just, it's a consequence of somebody else's marketing scheme.
Yeah, I mean, if people can't see by now that liberalism hasn't been liberating, then they're not looking hard enough, because never before have we had so many complaints about the condition of men in society, and fragmenting the family is what
Mhm.
does this, because that's the locus of male authority and also fulfillment. I
And
think something like
purpose and
half of
identity.
all liberal white women over age 30 have a mental health problem.
Mm.
There was a
Yeah.
study on that in 2019. So things aren't going well. And this is because, as human beings, we are relational. It's not about just individuality and pursuing our own goals. So I like the fact that we've got relating in the quotation here, because that's what it's all about. And as
Mm.
Christians, the Trinity holds the key to understanding ourselves.
Yeah. Well put. Well said.
So Tim's project in the book is basically saying that to regain control of the culture, we need to start by regaining control of the home. And he points out that laymen vastly outnumber priests. And it's no small task, but if we get enough people working on it, then we'll have an enormous impact. And that seems like a sensible way forward to me, given that the family is so fundamental to society.
Yeah, certainly. I would think that uh, the average listener, the average person who's concerned about the degradation of the West is likely going to be a single guy or a father, and not a priest, and asking themselves, well, what can I do? And I think that this provides probably the one of the best, like, pragmatic answers as to, well, yeah, here's some steps,
Yeah,
here's some ideas, and here's some things that you can do without having to become a clergyman.
that's it. This is where the rubber hits the road. You take the rubber off, you get married and have some kids, and then things can work from there. You don't
Mm.
go online and start tweeting about ethno nationalism while remaining childless. That's not going to get anything done.
Yeah, I was gonna say trying to, like, I don't know, overthrow the new world order by yourself online is probably getting a bit of ahead of yourself, as opposed to, like, just finding a wife and trying to, like, raise some chickens and then some kids. That's probably a more efficacious and probably a more realistic goal than, whatever
Yeah,
else the online community is trying to do.
completely agree. And let's just unpack a bit what this idea of being like Christ to your wife means. Now, that's about self sacrifice. So, the point with Christ as the masculine ideal is that it's the culmination of the protector role. Just like the soldier is willing to lay down his life for his comrades and his nation, Christ lays down his life for all of us and for the church, for salvation. So, this is a calling to men as husbands to be willing to give their lives to their wives. And if necessary, that means protecting them
Mhm.
physically with their lives. But it's also more broadly than that. You're called to self-sacrifice in your duties as a father. So it's not just about authority as getting your own way. It's about ordering the society of the family to the common good of the rearing and the education of children, and ultimately getting yourself, your wife, and your kids to heaven.
Mhm. Yep, certainly. The um the when I was reading this, I was thinking there's a quote from C.S. Lewis in God in the Docks where he says something like, Christianity, it's either something to be taken fully seriously or not seriously at all, but it's certainly not these things. It's not one of the things that you can take half seriously. And I think that reading Tim's book or the opening chapters of it really that's sort of what I had in mind. It's like, well, there is a God, and Christ was crucified and rose again, and the resurrection happened, and then this is something to be taken deadly seriously, not half seriously, and that means following following the scripture, following what the patristic said, following the magisterium. Right? It's like it's this sort of like one foot in the boat, one foot in the dock just doesn't cut it. And but I think that modernity sort of asks everybody to sort of be that way, and that's not consistent at all. It seems like with the tradition of the church.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a note struck in Tim's book that actually a lot of this has been about um, a male stampede from responsibility, or a failure to actually uphold the traditions of Christianity. And your comment there has got me thinking that part of it is to do, I think, with fear and intimidation of the burden of authority and what it really means to do this right.
Mm,
It's a position of power, but it's also a really demanding one,
yeah, yeah, I would imagine so.
right? Now, what goes wrong? The weak spot in family unity is obedience, according to Tim. And he argues that this is the very thing that was weaponized. Let's read the full quotation here because I thought it was very tellingly worded. Because one of the things that offends feminists most of all is the idea that the woman should be obedient to her husband. And Tim writes that since the fall of mankind, through Eve's rebellion, any destroyers or usurpers of familial fabric acting under diabolical agency or inspiration will perennially understand the weak spot in family unity, obedience. Now, this is something that Marx pushed quite hard in agitating the relations between the sexes. So, Marx and Engels both argued that the patriarchal institution ultimately rested on the family, and that was the locus of capitalism for them, and it had to go. And they said that women were subject to unorganized tyranny of men. And if you can get people believing that kind of thing, we're all
Hmm,
being
hmm.
oppressed.
Right.
We want to break free, we don't want to obey. It's great for stirring up revolutionary sentiment.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. The this is reminding me of getting back to what Gucko mentioned, where it's like that this same revolutionary egalitarian function. It's present in communism and it's present in liberalism as well. It's both of them are antagonistic to any type of natural law, and trying to liberate from those categories or those duties or demands in various ways.
Well, in both cases, we get an attack on hierarchy, which consists
Mm-hmm.
in leveling, just trying to flatten everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you lose the proper ordering of how people are supposed to relate to each other because it's seen as like the supreme evil. What there's a way I'm supposed to act, or I have duties towards somebody, or we aren't equal. That's the ultimate horror, isn't it? Not being equal.
Right. Yeah. In all respects or something. Yeah. How it's never really fully cashed out either.
But that's what this is built on. This need for obedience is built on that. So we have man isn't equal to God, and then woman isn't equal to man, and the child isn't equal to the parents.
Mm-hmm.
All human beings are made in the image of God, equally so, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean identically in their relationships to each other.
Right. Or in our accidents.
Yeah, true. I got told off at school once for saying something that on reflection I think was actually a good insight for a 17-year-old. It was that women are halfway between children and men, and I was told that that was, a terrible thing to have said, and not to make any remarks like that again. But I think it was a fair point in that we've got the ordering with the family that the husband leads, and men are physically and psychologically suited to that leadership.
Mm,
And we'll talk about this later, but women on a deep level look to men for leadership, crave it and respect it when they get it, and
mm,
resent it when men don't actually offer them it, and when men expect women to lead. That's one of the
mm.
main statistical correlations with divorce, when the woman is the main earner in the household. So they do seem to actually recognize, whether they will say it or not, this is the way things are supposed to be.
I was, yeah. There's another thought that I had here. Was that if imagine we were given this exact same content, but we're two Muslims making these same claims, or we were on Fresh and Fit and we were two pimps talking about that. These are the way we have authority over the hoes or whatever. The mainstream would totally give us a pass, right? Oh well, that's totally fine. This is allowed. But suddenly, if it's Christian men talking about any type of authority over and in relation to women, now the red sirens are activated. So just something for the audience to think about is the if the content were identical, but it was those two groups making the same claims, why do they get a pass but we don't? Just something to think about.
One thought I've got about that is that when it comes from people like that, there's no real metaphysical substance to it. In a sense, what they are saying superficially happens to be true, in that there is male authority over women, but because most of those guys are talking about it as unmarried men, and we haven't got the family unit, and we're not posing any kind of threat ultimately to the superstructure of this
Mm,
managerial state that wants to take the place of the family. Well, I don't think they really care too much. So if it's just a pimp slapping up some hoes, then that's going to be toxic masculinity. And
mm,
he might get a red flag for that. But it's almost worse, as you say, for a father to say, in this household, we challenge all of consumerist society. We also keep a watchful eye over everything that goes on in schools,
mm.
and we are in the world but not of it. That's more
Yep.
of a threat.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. But I still think maybe the Fresh and Fit connection was a bit too far. But I think if two Muslim podcasters were saying these men have authority over women, women should obey men, then I think that this would totally it would generate absolutely no negative attention from the YouTube algorithms. So I still think that I think that does have some as more metaphysical substance behind it than the
Well, that's
the other guys.
for sure. And that's the question of why the left is generally more sympathetic to Islam than it is to Christianity.
Hmm.
And one easy response to that is that it sees Islam as a tool that it can use to
Yes.
further its
Yeah.
attack on Christianity, because
Hmm.
Islam, as we've mentioned before, is a streamlined, highly masculinized Christian heresy. And in the short term, at least, the left thinks it can use it to undermine what the real heart of Western culture is, which is
Hmm.
Catholic Christendom.
Yeah. 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 I think that's that makes sense. Why it gets very similar sounding ideas get a pass.
Right. Now, it's important to bear in mind that Tim stresses many times in the book that Christianity just is patriarchy. And when they say smash the patriarchy, what they
Hmm.
mean is smash Christianity.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if Islam helps them do that, in the short term. They think,
Right. Yes.
great.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Not that I think they could actually ever complete that task. I think Islam would end up defeating liberalism long before liberalism managed to tackle that. The last two dogs
I
in the fight will be Christianity and Islam ultimately.
yeah, I agree.
So how come this is the weak spot then? Why is obedience so important?
Well, speaking as a former military officer,
Hmm.
when you lose obedience, you lose coherence, and everything breaks down. And what there's certain goods that can only be achieved and maintained if people are working together to each do their part to maintain it. And if obedience breaks down, then that collective good just evaporates. So that's one answer.
Yeah. So we've got, to use a sports team analogy or a military unit, everyone's got a role to play so they
Hmm.
can work towards the objective that the whole unit or team is trying to achieve. And with a family, we've got the common good of rearing the children, for example.
Hmm.
And now it might be that should be that the husband is the breadwinner, a single income household, and the wife has her own duties at home. Now, feminism says this is beneath you. You need to go out and take on a different role. This is demeaning for you to stay at home and perform these tasks.
Hmm.
Then we're inspiring disorder within the family unit because the person who's got the particular aptitudes and is suited by nature to that role isn't doing it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Then yeah, all sorts of confusion abounds after that.
And this is a good pressure point. It's a good way to agitate because the Christian narrative of the fall is that pride is very heavily involved in this. And although she is subject to the husband, the wife finds this a challenge, doesn't really want to be. This is fallen human nature. There's going
Hmm.
to be resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. This is uh, yeah, it's a feature of our fallen situation, and I think this. I mean, being human and being Christian is difficult. You know, being able to walk the narrow path is difficult. This isn't intended, and it's not supposed to be easy. And I think both sexes have various crosses that they have to shoulder.
Yeah, that's right. And for a man, the leadership as service, so the role of being a husband and a father, that also involves having to fight against pride too. So this isn't about getting your own way all the time. It's about
Mm-hmm.
what's right for the family.
Yep.
So yes, you lead, but you're also serving, and you got to give it to the people who are pushing the buttons on this project to destabilize the family. And ultimately, as Tim points out, it's under diabolic influence, which is why it's been so intelligently done. This is the exact way to do it.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. If yeah, yeah, I can't think of a more fundamental way to cause chaos than to, yeah, to pit men against women and to pit wives against husbands. Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be the way to do it.
that's it. And people wondering why the sexual revolution, all right, it had its beginnings before the 60s, but really started getting going in the 1960s. Why it had the impact that it did is because you were toying with the bedrock of society by interfering with the family. So if you want to
Mm.
create maximum chaos, you go for the foundations in exactly
Yes.
this way.
Yeah. Yep. This is Gramsci's insight as well.
What do you mean by that? Say a bit more for people who haven't heard of him before.
Oh, so Antonio Gramsci, one of the neo-Marxists that Peterson references, I guess, what he was chucked in jail in the 30s by Mussolini and company, and wrote, I think, 30 books or 30 volume set of how he wanted to refit the elements of Marxism to really deteriorate the undergirding of, of of the West, and he realized that mobilizing workers wasn't enough. You know, mobilizing the workers against the bourgeoisie class is not enough. We need to rip out the very foundations of the culture, and that is going to have to start with Christianity and the family. And he coined the term "long march through the institutions," and that's sort of what we've inherited for the large part with the institutions we now see.
Yeah, and the whole aim in getting control of education, for example, in the way that Gramsci
Mhm.
outlined, is because you want to control children and form their minds
Mhm.
and affect the way that they're going to run their own families. Or ideally, I think the goal is actually that they don't get married.
Right? Yeah, yeah. They're end up being atomized, inert slave caste, essentially. They're very easily manipulable.
That's it. And that's why the red pill manosphere view of men as lone wolves who
Mm.
have disdain for marriage and don't get involved in any of this and just enjoy their promiscuous tingles whenever they feel like it. That is the exact kind of person that the propaganda wanted them to be.
Certainly, yeah. And this is where I think so many of those folks, when they hear you say that these guys are feminists, they still don't understand what you mean by that. And it's no, yeah, this is whatever they're male feminists. They're effectively they're de facto socialists, insofar as their actions are withering the family and promoting a greater leftist state apparatus.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They've got you exactly where they want you, which is outside of the family, not having your stamp, not impressing your authority on
Mm.
your home. They've dethroned you as the domestic king of your own little kingdom. That's
Hmm.
where they
Hmm.
don't want men.
Yep. And they certainly, yeah, they certainly don't want men in positions of authority within their own nuclear families, and they don't want close knit, extended families that can act and work in concert with one another and demonstrate, their own partiality towards helping one another out and resisting, yeah, this sort of global consumerist system. That's
Right.
not what they want
That's a
at all.
great point, and that's a reminder of how political authority throughout history has really, really developed. You get the men who run their families well being trusted in the
Hmm.
community and getting positions of power. And then from that, we get like village councils, for example.
Hmm.
And then we
Yep.
have different villages connecting up. And then we get regional level. And then it extends up towards the nation like an extended family. But the root
Yep.
of it all is
Hmm.
household male authority.
Yep.
Now, super controversial. Wives must obey their husband's directives in all things, except explicit orders to commit grave sin. Missing the word except there, my fault. Except
Right.
explicit orders to commit grave sin. Now, how many people hear this in church?
I
This
was
is the
gonna say,
one
yeah,
shot kill shot for feminism, isn't it?
people start getting nervous. Like, wait a second, yeah, what does this mean? Is this sounds sounds authoritarian? Um, but yeah, I guess the we'll get into it next week or maybe at the end of this week. But I mean, Tim rigorously goes through, scriptural backing, early patristics, Eastern patristics, Western patristics, all the encyclicals, all the various church councils, and it's a time and time again, like this theme keeps repeating itself. It's the surprisingly the church has not been mute on male female relations, and though most people, I think, in their their Norvis Ordo and most of their CCD classes growing up would have gotten, I don't know, maybe like first wave feminism version of Catholicism, right? So, some type of feminized Catholicism, but certainly not this.
Well, Tim points to a few passages in the Bible, Ephesians 5, for example, that are
Yes.
often bracketed in the missal,
Hmm.
as in, this doesn't have to get read out. So you can tell from which passages have been bracketed where the really juicy stuff is, where the
Right.
core of this is, what's really under
Mm.
attack. And this
Yep.
is the central idea. So, why is it that wives must obey their husbands? Let's just rewind a bit to some of our earlier points. So, this is about natural law and the way in which, given the constitution of human nature, men and women are supposed to relate to each other.
Hmm.
And although, on the face of it, this sounds so horrifyingly offensive to feminist sensibilities, what would our response be? Why is it actually to the benefit of women and especially children? This is the big point of the lecture I was fired for, which is that patriarchy is universal, worldwide, and history wide. Secular evolutionary anthropologists, making no reference to any of these concepts we're talking about from scriptural
Hmm.
metaphysics, acknowledge that patriarchy is universal. Every single human society that's ever existed has been a patriarchy. Now,
Hmm.
this tells me that this is rooted in the way that human beings are. We can't just magic a matriarchy out of thin air
Hmm.
because it's
Right.
not in our nature.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I think we have two really sound reference points. We have scriptural basis and all the derivative features that come off of that, and then we have the the, the grain of reality. We look to the world like good Aristotelians and Aristotomists, and we look at nature and go, what does flourishing look like? What does a flourishing family look like? What does a flourishing relationship between man and woman look like? And what does that look like writ large in a town or a small village or a society? And yeah, it tends to, as you just mentioned, uh, anthropologically, it tends to look patriarchal when it's working well, and it tends to either collapse or get invaded when it's not doing that thing, when it's not of that shape.
Right. And it's for the benefit of women and children because this ordering, this obedience,
Mm.
is actually leading them towards what fulfills them. So the male leadership is for the sake of the benefit of all the members of the family. Now, it might be, for example, in terms of keeping them safe from physical danger, or it
Hmm.
might
Hmm.
be moral instruction or religious instruction. But the point is that the man isn't just giving orders for the sake of it, it's
Right. Yeah.
about prudence and doing what is objectively right.
Hmm. Yeah.
Guys listening to this thinking, that makes sense. Look, every society ever has been a patriarchy. There's something to this. I know that women don't pick guys who are really submissive, physically weak, and look like they couldn't provide for them, protect them, and aren't the kind of guys who'd be wanting to give orders anyway. So there's something to it, but it seems impossible. And Tim addresses this point. He says that to stop men reclaiming their rightful position as leaders, counterinsurgency is forestalled primarily through psychological means. He gives some examples in advertising, in TV. Think of The Simpsons. We've got Homer, we've
Right.
got
Yeah. Yeah.
Ned Flanders
Yep.
as well, and
Hmm.
you've got numerous other Hollywood and cartoon characters. You've either got the caricature of the man, what's that one, American Dad, where he goes to one extreme, so they make him into a ridiculous figure who's laughable in that he's not really got any kind of serious authority or control over his family. And then we've got Homer Simpson, who is the opposite extreme, who
Hmm.
doesn't take things seriously enough.
Right.
Now, both of those aren't good models of manhood. That's not how a father's supposed to be. But those are
Mhm.
the ones that we're presented with. We're not shown a realistic picture of what things are actually supposed to look like.
The another two other classical examples from U.S. television are Archie Bunker from All in the Family and Al Bundy from Married with Children. They're both proto versions of the Homer Simpson character, of the inert doofus husband who he's just trapped, his family just doesn't respect him, and he's just gets just run over. So I think those are also sort of great examples in the culture as well
Yeah,
of of the continued psyop.
it's the weak one, and then it's also the one who, in trying to take authority and look strong, is also ridiculed. So
Hmm.
men
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know which way to go. It seems like there's no way to get this done properly. And it seems to be effective because a lot of people like the idea of overthrowing feminism, but can't see how it could ever be done. And
Hmm.
instead, you
Hmm.
get this viewpoint where we just say, oh, well, I guess that's it. We have to just enjoy the decline now.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's that type of nihilistic cynicism is somehow looked at as being like the adult view, right, or the the enlightened view. I'm just above all of this. I recognize that it's anyone that has any fight left in them is somehow naive. um but I'm more wise, and I recognize everything's just nihilistic and meaningless. So I'm just going to titillate myself and encourage everybody else to do the same. um Fine. All right, cool. Go go listen to something else if you have another solution. Best of luck.
I think when you ask people to define the red pill, they can't. Even Rollo Tomasi, who's tried to take it as kind of his brand, he hasn't got an elevator pitch for it. They can't put it concisely into a sentence like, what is it? What do you realize when you take the red pill? But I think that what you've paraphrased there is a pretty accurate description of what, in practice, they think it really means. Something about waking up to this dark truth that
Hmm.
various steps, not outlined fully, means that not caring about marriage and living a promiscuous life is actually somehow enlightened.
Somehow enlightened, and it's also like as we've talked about in the other books we've reviewed, it's this toggling back and forth between like, well, everything's just evolutionarily determined. We're all just meat machines determined to be promiscuous and hypergamous and da da da. Oh, wait a second, this guy offended me online. How dare he use his agency in that way? That's such an unfair thing to do. That's immoral. That's dishonorable.
Yeah.
Now will and agency and morality just bubble back into the picture, and no, but we're all just determined meat machines and everything's meaningless, and so it's just writ large. I think that you just see elements of that all the time in in those conversations and in that community.
And this is the effect of what we're looking at now. So rather than counterinsurgency and trying to retake the most important battleground, which is marriage and the family, instead, they've been convinced that there's no point even trying.
They're
But
psyoping themselves and one another too, right? It's you don't even need the left to be like, oh well, don't even bother trying. These guys they're saying it to one another, like, oh well, everything's just doomed.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
second they start talking, I've made this point before, but straight away I just sit back and wait until it ends at fornication. It's like, just hurry up,
You're-
take me through the steps. Like, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. I know where you're going with it. Just come out and say it. And they always do, every time.
Therefore, I'm allowed to fornicate, and yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. That's it's one step or it's 20 steps, but that's the conclusion.
Yes.
Yeah,
Get the watch out and time it so you get a record. Um, and what was the other point I was going to make about this? I had one more thought about it. I've distracted myself now with the fornication joke. I'll come back to me in a second.
yeah.
Now, if we are looking at getting back into the family and this, even in a secular marriage, or if we go to something like ancient Chinese culture with Confucianism,
Hmm.
they're really clear on this male leadership, the male authority within marriage. And it's because, as Tim points out, men are naturally and even biologically inclined toward leading others.
Hmm.
The deeper point, I think, built on this is that women naturally and biologically look for this too.
Yep.
So, for guys thinking, how can this work? What if I get married and this isn't how my household works? I've seen friends who are married and the man doesn't look like he's got any kind of authority to me. This idea that a man naturally has authority, I've seen it fail a few times around me. How do I know it's going to work for me? What
Right,
kind of
right.
response would we give to that?
I think that the more men can become acquainted with scripture and with traditional Catholic teachings, and the more they can surround themselves with men that are like that, then there are latent capacities that can be awakened in them that may or not realize that are there. So I think that that's a big part of it. You know, if you can, you are pulled up to the norms and levels and behaviors of your peer group. And then I think also if you can get a tipping point going, then this can be normalized, even if it's not present within your social circle or in your particular parish. And those are just some thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's right. Seeing it in action can help give some inspiration. The other
Yep.
point is that remember that there's never been a matriarchy, and patriarchy is rooted in human nature. So that should give you the confidence to at least try to make this thing work
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's
You're.
what human history has been built on. And when you see the fact that there are women who are seeking to resist this and don't like the idea of obedience in theory, even though when it's done well, it helps them to flourish in practice. Well, Christianity itself tells you you should expect to see that. You should expect to see resistance to the idea of wifely obedience because of the consequences of the fall.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. This isn't some silver bullet overnight thing that you just decide and then it just is the case.
Right. Now, we've got some really good questions that we'll get to in a second, but just want to make the point that Tim, as we mentioned before, stresses that many of these problems come from men not fulfilling their roles properly. And I mentioned that one of the surest ways to get divorced is for your wife to be the main breadwinner in the household.
Mm. Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
that causes big psychological problems and physical problems too. Male impotence is really highly correlated with the woman earning more than the man. Your body knows that you've been cucked at that point and you're not supposed to be living that way.
Hmm.
So, if you want this trad life where you have the male authority role within the household, then it means having that sense of living up to what you're supposed to be doing. And I like this point that's come in here. Gordon talks about the removal of reproduction itself as a purpose from marriage and families. So think about how different it is for a couple who are having a large family, as natural law says they should, versus a couple who maybe have no kids because the woman's on
Hmm.
the pill, or maybe just one or two kids.
Hmm.
The woman's more likely to think that the household isn't that important. Maybe put the kids in daycare, go out to work, then we get a two
Right.
income
Right.
household,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
dynamic that would help them to flourish is now suddenly threatened because
Hmm.
they're not living according to natural law.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's spot on. That yeah. Once reproduction and bearing a big family becomes on par with like keeping a career or keeping a second income or something, then yeah, those are just going to be at cross purposes and cause unnecessary friction. It seems like.
Right. And Nicholas is also making the point that some men are ignorant about what they are supposed to be doing and what the proper fulfillment of their role really involves.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you mentioned how much of this is taught in churches. Well, some of it is bracketed as optional because it's seen as offensive.
Mhm. Yeah. The it's bracketed, seen as offensive, and I think there's so many Novus Ordo churches are they've been highly feminized. I mean, your interview with Chivalry Guild, he had a great quote where he said, "Most Catholic churches now are like women's social groups," and it's like, "Ooh, that stings," but that's seems kind of correct.
Yeah, and yet it's also not a victim narrative because the men have abdicated authority and need to take responsibility for that failing. And that's where the real sting is. The guys
Yep.
who point the finger at women and say, the big bad mean women that came and took
They chased,
everything
yeah, they
from us.
chased us out.
Yeah, exactly. That's not the way to do it. Now, we've got Nicholas has mentioned that uh, with an institution so hollowed out and without leadership, I would also feel bleak about the situation. Sorry, Michael.
I
Now,
would too. Yeah. Look,
yeah,
I mean, I, hear what you're saying. I'm not trying to say we should just put on rose-colored glasses. What I'm referring to is the folks that they just say every, like having any fighting instinct left in you whatsoever to prop up anything is somehow naive. So just whatever, just roll over and die. That's what I'm responding to, and it's just like, okay, at least live on your feet, like that, just that sort of whining nihilism. That's what I'm responding to, and I don't
yeah,
think it's sophisticated. I don't think it's philosophically grounded. And I don't think it's clever. Um, so that's what I'm trying to point out. The black pill, so to speak. That's what I'm responding to. But yeah, I it is an uphill battle, and existence on this earth is in a sense an uphill battle, right?
mm,
We're in we're in Satan's kingdom. So in that sense, yeah, we are on in a losing position in this world. But you know,
the
that's yeah.
whenever you thinking that anything's looking bleak, there's that line from Book of Job: "Life is a warfare," and especially for men, that's true. You're not built
Mhm,
for comfort and security, and you shouldn't expect the most important battleground between God and the devil, the family and marriage, to be anything less than the most intense battleground.
mhm, yeah,
So, what were you expecting? And yeah, if there's bleakness, you got to think, where is there not going to be, and what is bleaker? Giving this a go because the rewards are so great and it's so important, or just shrug your shoulders and accept total emasculation and
mhm,
concede family life and the ultimate root of male authority to your enemies. I mean, that's real bleakness.
yeah, yeah.
So, this is a quote I just mentioned. This is from the Fatima
Mhm,
visionary, Sister Lucia. The final battle between the kingdom of Christ and Satan will be over marriage and the family. Now, there are people who argue that it doesn't look unlike the end times
mhm,
around now. There
mhm,
are things that we can observe that we would expect to see if we were entering them. The situation where so many men feel that marriage and the family are lost is one of those, I would argue. And I think it's the most important topic in contemporary culture because of the fact that the family is the foundation of society. And if we get this wrong, we got too many men being overcome by cowardice because they think that the stakes are too high, then this is the fight we're going to lose.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, individually and then collectively, yeah, across the if society's single cell is the nuclear family, then culture wide, this is going to be yeah, it's going to iterate across everything. The West won't stand without that firm foundation. And then then I don't know. We'll see what happens after that.
Well, in Rome, Augustus was practically begging men to get married and have kids. How are
Hmm.
we going to preserve the Commonwealth if we don't marry and have children? That was his point to the noblemen. And the marriage avoidance rates were very high. And as we see now with LGBTQ, 2SIA, we have homosexuality, uh, lesbianism, etc., as they had in Rome as well, as a consequence of breakdown of monogamy. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than seeing LGBTQ as a cause of what's going on today, it would be more sophisticated anthropologically to see it as a symptom of it. Because when
Certainly.
you get breakdown of monogamy, you get, as the incels complain about, uh, more women going with fewer men at the top of the male dominance hierarchy. And this means throughout human history that monogamy and homosexuality are inversely correlated. It's a really interesting fact, one of the strongest correlations in all anthropology. When you
Mm.
get more men with multiple wives, or I suppose as the case is now, um, multiple friends with benefits, then more guys tend to end up being sexually active with each other.
Hmm. I did not know that.
Yeah,
That statistic. Wow.
it's a common sense way to think about it. It's what happens in prison.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
So prison's a hotbed of homosexual activity because there aren't many women to go around, obviously. Now, if we take that extreme example and then just rewind a few steps and think about assortative pairing under monogamy, one guy, one girl, all the way up from the top of the two hierarchies. So the 10 out of 10s paired with the 10 out of 10s down to the 1 out of 10s. But
Mm.
everyone's happy because they got someone. But
Right.
then if we skew that by breaking down monogamy in the family, then we've got maybe all the 6, 7, 8 out of 10 girls looking for the 9, 10 out of 10 guys.
Mm.
And then the others, well, what are they going to do? What we see in the world throughout history is that the guys tend to just end up saying, fine, I guess I'll just have a relationship with my buddy over here who's also miserable and can't find a woman.
Hmm. It's I don't know. It's insightful.
Certainly an effective way of creating social havoc, which I think is why
Yeah.
this is the ultimate battle line.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other point is, what are you going to do instead? What's the alternative? Tim makes the point that scripturally and in terms of church teaching, household patriarchy exists necessarily, not optionally.
Mm. Yeah. This goes back to, well, natural law. Goes back to scripture, and it goes back to, yeah, the natural built duties that are built into both of the sexes in virtue of what their nature is. So you can't escape nature, and you can't escape your nature. So that's why these duties are, they're not pick and choose. They're not a la carte duties that you can just swap out.
Yeah. The reason there's never been any society except patriarchy is that you can't do it any other way. So take confidence in the fact that this is how things are supposed to be. And even more than that, it's the only way they actually can be. To
Mm.
smash patriarchy would be to smash human nature.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you're fighting against the grain of reality at the most fundamental level.
Right. And this is why eventually, whether or not people want it to, it will collapse, just like the Soviet Union ran into the
Hmm.
ground,
Yeah,
because reality always gets the last laugh.
yeah. Late stage Rome, Weimar Republic, any of the, what was it, 250 separate societies that Glub looked at this, or like 80. I don't know. I forget how many
Yeah,
Glub looked
Unwin
at,
was
but it was
80. Yeah.
Unwin. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost it's almost as if there's like a structure to reality. Like to human flourishing. It's almost as if there are um, joints upon which the world has been carved.
Yeah, there's that scholastic metaphysician Joseph Rickaby. He described natural law as God's signature. So God's
Mm,
signature in human nature. This is the way things are supposed to be, and you can discover it without any reference to revelation at all.
mm,
But
mm,
as Tim puts it really eloquently, grace builds on nature, or revelation is going to complement and
mm,
clarify natural
mm.
reason. So you
Right.
look around you and you see patriarchy, patriarchy, patriarchy everywhere I look, all through human history. What's going on here? Then you look at the Bible and you look at the church's teachings, and they
Mm,
say, here's why you see it, and here's what it really
right.
means, and
Mm,
here's some
mm.
stuff that you haven't noticed about it and what it's really
Yep.
for. And
Mm,
then your eyes are fully open to what it's really about. And when that
yep.
clicks, you understand why it's under attack.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Definitely.
So, this is one of the most controversial biblical verses about it. As the
Mm,
church is subject to Christ, so let wives be subject in everything to their husbands. We touched on it earlier, but
mm,
let's just recap on this idea that what we've got is men serving to lead. That's
mm,
not how patriarchy is normally phrased. It's normally presented to try and make women unhappier about it and cause agitation as just
mm,
men
mm.
getting their own way all the time. But
Just yeah, just on a whim for like just no reason. They're just speaking authority out of nothing. Yeah.
yeah, right. But that's not what Christ does with the church. It's about the shepherd leading the sheep.
Mhm. It's about the shepherd leading the sheep, and it's not as if the husband's decision making has no boundaries or anything informing it, right? Like that is going a well governed patriarchal father is going to be his thinking is going to be very very informed by church teachings, by um, checking in with his local priest and parish. Like he's not just going to be just willing shaking the magic 8 ball and be like, I think I'll do this. I mean, that's just that would make no sense. That like clearly the the husband and father's decision making is girded by a higher authority as well.
Right. And even a legitimate temporal authority over the state is bound by natural law. So it's not just whatever I say goes.
Mm,
It's about doing what's right for the given situation, given the reality of human nature and your duties. It's not just imposing your will for no reason.
mm, right. Yeah.
Now, another point we've got, uh, let a woman learn in silence with all submissiveness. Here, if we cut out 1 Timothy 2:11, this sounds Islamic.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Now, people get upset sometimes when I say I agree with a lot of the stuff in Islam.
Mm,
And it's because if you look closely, there's deep parallels, profound parallels in the understanding of patriarchy in both,
mm,
because Islam does get a lot right. It goes
mm,
wrong, but I would argue that the reason it appeals to somebody like Tate, for example,
mm,
and the guys who look up to him is that, ironically, it's done a better job in some ways of articulating Christian tradition than
mm.
some of the Christian churches have.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's well said. I agree.
And what you are resonating with, if you're one of those guys, is Christian truth.
Mm.
Anything true in Islam is in Christianity,
Catholicism in particular. Yeah.
right? Exactly. Which, with the Pope, which literally just means father, is the most patriarchal of all the Christian churches because it's the one true church, and Christianity is patriarchy. So that's what the papacy is ultimately about.
Yeah.
St. Paul has a point about why women should be silent in church that Tim highlighted nicely, which is that it's a sign of submission. He says they're naturally talkative, and the silence is about submission. It's signaling that they're there to learn. But this is something that many guys haven't seen in Christian churches, and that many priests, I think, would even be scared to teach. I think I would put it
Right.
as strongly as that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think my CCD growing up, it was all female instructors, except for the like one male instructor that uh, he would sort of just run around every once in a while and pop in and quote something and then run away. But yeah, it's almost all uh, mothers and female instructors. And yeah, I think that that's probably common for a lot of folks of my generation and younger.
Yeah, well, it's like that line in Fight Club, isn't it? We're a generation of men raised by women, and then
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
you scratch your heads and you look around and wondering how things have become a mess. Well, St.
Mhm.
Paul wouldn't be surprised. Women shouldn't be teaching in church.
Is it right? Yeah. Yep.
Now, Aquinas develops that point nicely. Tim quotes him saying that a woman, if she have superiority, is contrary to her husband. And the contrary there really means contrary to natural law, the way the right ordering of the sexes should be.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Sounds spot on.
Yeah,
Sounds like sounds like common sense that you wouldn't even need to have heard of Aquinas to figure out. And but it seems so sometimes stating the obvious. I guess also that Orwell quote that Chivalry Guild mentioned. Yeah, stating the obvious is sometimes like a courageous or like profound act in certain times.
that's right. Can get you fired as well.
Yeah, can.
So, if you're a guy who is feeling that deep down in his bones he knows feminism is wrong, but you're currently aligning with this naturalistic metaphysic that gives you nothing other than Darwinism, you can't coherently say that feminism is wrong objectively. You've got no grounds for that.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
don't pretend that you don't know it's wrong, and use that as the first brick you can pull out of that naturalistic worldview till it all comes crumbling down. And if you want the answers, go back over some of our book club streams, go back to the phaser, and
Mhm.
then why this is contrary to the way women and men are supposed to be will become clearer to you. And then you can start clawing your way back to a full understanding of what your duties as a man really are.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely start with the phaser. I think that that does a lot of great work at filling those gaps um, in people's philosophical foundations, and then you can build from there.
Great. So we covered a little bit about the metaphysics of the family and also what church tradition teaches. And in subsequent lessons on Tim's book, we'll be looking at practically what does this look like in day-to-day life within the family and what are the first steps we need to take to make it happen.
Mhm. Sounds like a plan. I'm
All
looking
right.
forward to that.
Yeah, it'd be good. Nice to talk to you. See you next time.
Same here. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.